here. Most people could be here today because we're starting a new book. It's a very famous part of the Bible, the book of Job. We're not, okay, sorry, we're not streaming yet. It's an important part of the Bible because it's often quoted. It's often, Job is often referred to. People just say, the suffering of Job, and everybody, kind of, oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Okay, so, yeah, there's I'm going to turn this off of me right now. So people talk about, being a long-suffering Job, and people, will talk about Job in a way that, he becomes synonymous with suffering. The book is a lot more nuanced and a lot more complicated, as we're about to see, and I'll let you kind of make your judgments about what the point of the book is, and how it kind of, where it fits into, where it fits into our text. But the rabbis were also had difficulties with it, and they weren't exactly sure what to do with it. And I will tell you that we have a, you're going to find, and actually I'll tell you right away, that there were people who throughout Jewish history have said that this story is not a real story. This is like some people felt the book of Jonah was a dream. Maimonides said that the book of Job is a parable. It didn't really happen. It's a fable or a parable, a story that teaches a lesson, but shouldn't be taken live. Shouldn't be taken as truth, as something that factually happened. Take it as truth, but don't take it as a fact. So people did have problems with the story as an account of an actual person's life. There are also theories about its authorship that range from the fact that it was written by multiple authors to theories that it was written by one author who wrote a prose prologue and an epilogue, and then wrote a poetic reflection in the middle. A lot of people, I think, I kind of always felt it was written by two authors, but there are a lot of scholars who believe it wasn't written by two authors, that there's not enough based on the language to say that they're written by different people. There's not different words used or employed that people would say, we can definitively say that these were written by different people who lived at different times. Most people feel that this came from a period of time in Jewish history where we had returned from exile. So we're talking about 500 BCE up to maybe 300 BCE, when wisdom literature, like we read in the book of Proverbs, was probably written. This is grouped at the beginning with Psalms and Proverbs as wisdom literature. The book of Ecclesiastes also is wisdom literature, but Ecclesiastes is also one of the scrolls, one of the Megillot. So Ecclesiastes is grouped with those books. But it also is very much what we call wisdom literature. Christians organize this as part of wisdom literature. And so in our, the sound's not on Facebook. That's weird. Huh. And somebody said that, huh?
No.
Oh, I'm not sure how that is, how Facebook's not getting any sound. I'll try to find it. So when we look at the book and how it came to us, the rabbis traditionally kind of said that the book might have, as I said, might be not actually have happened. And what opens that up for a possibility is that Job is referred to in the Bible. He's referred once in the source outside of the book. In the book of Ezekiel, he's mentioned as a man of wisdom. And so he is mentioned in another book of the Bible, but he's not mentioned in any of the chronological any of the chronologically kind of historic books, if you will, or books where we can find some type of history. And so we don't really know when Job lived. We know where he lived, and we're going to see from the beginning, we kind of can place him maybe around some biblical people, but the rabbis themselves argue that he was a contemporary of Abraham. Perhaps he was a contemporary of Moses. The rabbis really aren't sure when he lived and who exactly Job was. And also to the point that maybe, again, he was Jewish, or maybe he wasn't Jewish. And so we don't really know a lot about him from the book itself. We don't learn about really his story from, we don't learn from the book itself why we have this book, from the sense of, is he a person that we need to know about? Is he connected to any of the other people of the Bible? We don't really know. And in the Midrash, he can be a contemporary of Abraham, but he also might be a contemporary of Moses, in the sense that there is a tradition that Job is one of the courtiers of Pharaoh who knows that God is real and is upset with Pharaoh for not listening to Moses and not listening to the plagues, and he escapes, that he gets out. He's one of the courtiers, which would place him during the time of Moses. So the rabbis aren't really sure who he is. They're not sure whether he's a Jew or not. He definitely has a relationship with God because God talks to him. And oh, I guess I'm on now, right? So we're not really sure who he is, where exactly he lived, and again, whether or not he's even a Jew or Hebrew. I will also tell you that there are versions or there are stories similar to Job in other writing and literature from the ancient world. As a matter of fact, we have a text, sometimes called the Babylonian Job, but it's a text that we discovered, and we've discovered different copies of it and different versions of it. So it was a well-known text that's 700 years older than, if Job was written during the 500s, it's 700 years older, carbon dated to an earlier time. And it's about, again, a righteous sufferer, somebody who suffers for no reason. And so we have found other texts. There's also an Egyptian text about a righteous sufferer. So there are similar texts or similar ideas of a person who suffers who doesn't deserve to suffer. That doesn't necessarily help us from the standpoint of it's not Job in those stories. The stories are somewhat different, and it definitely doesn't have the Jewish tones that the book does have, because there are definitely, the author of it is definitely, I can't say definitely, but there's no reason to believe the author was not a Jew, a Judean, somebody who subscribes to Jewish ideas and is a Jewish person. And so it definitely has always been accepted that this is a Jewish book. It's written in Hebrew. We know it's originally written in Hebrew. We see some Aramaic borrowed words, but we know that and that's one of the reasons why we date it to the 500s, but we know that it's written by a Jew. And what's interesting about it, and again, I'm not going to talk a lot about it before we read it because you make your own decisions, but we call this a theodicy because it's about the nature of why people suffer. Why do the righteous suffer? Why does anyone suffer? But specifically, why do the righteous suffer? And we don't have that discussion in the earlier parts of the Bible, because it does seem from at least the first 5 books from the Torah that the righteous people, at least if they suffer, it has nothing to do necessarily, well, they don't really address it. The Bible up until now really has only dealt with collective, well, I shouldn't say up till now, because Psalms definitely has individual suffering, but the reason for that suffering, or the answers for why suffering happens or bad things happen, is really, at least in the Torah, it's not addressed. Everything in the Bible that, like, we've kind of discussed up until now has been collective punishment, that everyone gets punished And when bad things happen, it's because we all screwed up, or the majority of us screwed up, and so that we all suffer together. Job is, it doesn't deal with collective suffering. It deals with one person suffering. So it also kind of addresses a different issue. I've mentioned this many times. The Bible has three kind of answers for suffering. One is the covenantal suffering, that if you do bad things, we suffer, and we suffer collectively. The other is the book of Job that we're reading now, which again, you'll not ruining it by telling you that we don't know. And then the third is the Ecclesiastes answer, which really is no answer, which is there is no answer. Not that we don't know it, but there is no answer. So those are the three approaches that theologians have looked at and studied the Bible, have grouped the theodicy answers, the big question. They've said that those books represent those three answers, which you find in other things. We see it a little bit, and we saw it in Proverbs, we saw it in Psalms. Those are the three answers. Either it's collective, covenantal in Deuteronomy, it's Job, we just don't know, God knows, the answer is there, we just don't understand it. Or the third answer, which is no, there's no answer, which is the Ecclesiastes answer. So this is the second. This is the answer's there, and we don't know it. And again, I don't want to get too further into this, because let's read it and you come up with your answers. Maybe you have a different take on it. But again, the importance of Job, and we'll talk about it when we finish it, is also how much it has to do with the impact it's had on us since. Because the Job story is often quoted, often referenced. Job, literally all you have to say is, the man suffers like Job, and that's all you need to say, right? So it's so well known, and it's so important, and it's been referenced in so many cultural, there's so many cultural references that we have to it. One of the last ones that sticks out in my mind in its deep exploration of Job and this issue for the modern human being, maybe even for specifically the modern Jew, is the movie A Serious Man by the Coen brothers, which is one of their most deeply personal movies for them, because it's set in Minnesota during the 60s when they grew up, and it's very Jewish, the movie Serious Man. So if you want to watch that again after we read Job, might not be a bad idea. And one of the most Jobian characters that we know and love, that's been part of Jewish culture for the last 100 years, is Tevye, which Floyd just made me think about in the last couple of days, because he sent me a video that I'll put in, I'll share it out to everybody, because once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. But it is a Job reference, or at least a Tevye reference. But it is, I'm going to put it here out for everybody in the chat box. The Tevye is considered to be a version of Job, and one that we know and love, in the sense that we don't understand why Tevye doesn't understand why he's suffering. Why is he suffering? Why is he why does this poor guy have to deal with all this tragedy? And he does. In the book, in the Tevye stories, the tragedy is far deeper than the musical. The musical is actually a funny version of his suffering. In the books, or the collections, I should say, the Instagram I just posted up, the one that Floyd shared with me. In the short stories that were collected as part of the Tevye stories, because he didn't write it as a book. He wrote it as a series of stories, and they were published, collected together as an anthology. Those stories are not, they have funny elements, but they're not funny, and they're tragic. And if anything, it is It is the shtetl Job. It is the Job that was what most of our ancestors would have related to. So yeah, I just sent you a If I Were a Rich Man, which again, once it's been seen, can't be unseen. Leave it at that. Thank you, Floyd. So let's jump into Job with that introduction and a little bit of I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to talk too much about it because I want the book to stand by itself. But the first couple of chapters that we're going to read today, that we're going to dive into, and we're going to get into the poetry section, the monologue. It's not really so much poetry as it's a poetic style. The style of the writing is the biblical poetic style, but it's really monologue and dialogue style that's the type of writing that it is, but it's much different than the prose narrative that we have at the beginning, the first two chapters and the last chapters we're going to get to. But let's jump into it as we read the first couple of chapters and dive into the limited information we have about Job. But we'll have some fun with this. And we get introduced to a character that we really haven't seen yet in the Bible, and that is Satan. So let's jump in. Rosemary?
There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil.
So before we read any more, I just want to let you know, don't look for any other description of Job, his background, or anything else other than that line. There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That's it. That's all we know about him. We don't know his father's name. We don't know exactly when he lived. We know the land of Uz is mentioned in the book of Genesis as a place that would put it into the land of Edom, northern Saudi Arabia, southern Jordan. That area is the land of Uz. Some people think the land of Oz is a satire or as a play on that name of Uz. I don't know. We don't know for sure, but that's a theory that
Supposedly, Oz was named after the letters O to Z on a filing cabinet.
Correct. That was another theory, that it was something on Baum pick it off the filing cabinet, but some people said it was.
Or Oz for gold ounce.
So we don't know, but I will tell you this: we don't really know, and the only description we have of it in the other books puts it in the land of Edom, which would again call into question whether this guy is Jewish in the first place. Eob is not a well-known Hebrew name. Doesn't mean it's not, and it's of course not a lot of people wanted to name their kids Job after reading the story, right? So most people didn't want to say, "Here's my baby Job." It's a little bit more of a common name, interestingly, in Arabic. And so the story doesn't exist in its entirety in the Quran, but he is mentioned Eob in the Quran. He is mentioned, of course, also in the Christian Bible. Where he figures in with the Christians is also interesting because, again, if he is a Gentile, it shows us that there are Gentiles that are attached to the God of the Jews before there were Christians, if you will, before Jesus, at least. So that's an interesting little feature to kind of, if you will, the Christian midrash, if Job wasn't Jewish. And what we know from him right from the beginning is that he is an Ish Tam. He's a good, blameless guy. He's an innocent guy. We know that. He's upright. The fact that the rabbis said that maybe he's one of the courtiers in the Pharaoh's court to begin with kind of then says, well, maybe he wasn't always blameless, which is part of the story, the need to somehow say, maybe, again, he deserves something from some other time in his life. That's kind of where that midrash comes from. But yeah, we don't know. And we know that he was good, though, and that he feared God, which, by the way, is also a Yirah Elohim, a God-fearer, is a title that we have for people who are not Jewish, right? We talk about God-fearers, people who are haven't made a formal covenant to the Jewish people, but are living with a sense of believing in God. So this is interesting because Maybe it does lend itself to this idea that Job isn't an Israelite. He is not, maybe he isn't a Jew, but he is a God-fearer. So it's a possibility, which, by the way, also would kind of lend itself to this discussion of, but why is the story here, and how do we get, how do we get this? But that's all we know. The setup is, this is who he was. We know that from the beginning, that he is a good person, a blameless person. That's integral to the story that follows, okay? And that's what we know. That's it. That's all we know. All right, Rosemary.
A scroll.
Oh, it's not scroll. Hold it. Oh. Here we go. Scroll on the wrong page. Okay, wait, hold it a second. I have it opened on 2 pages. That's why. It's confusing. All right.
7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very large household. That man was wealthier than anyone in the East.
So he's very successful. He's very rich. It's a huge amount of property by any stretch of the imagination. It's huge amount of livestock to be maintained, right? It's impressive. One of the kind of the keys that kind of gives away the fact that this is written at a certain point is that there is already a domestication of camel by this time, and it also places it into an area where there would be camels, which is the land of Uz, which is more of a desert area. It's more of an area which was a caravan stop rather than a industrial cosmopolitan city. So this does seem to be a guy who has a setup in the area where he has huge areas to pasture his animals, but not necessarily, again, living in a major city, but can provide for a lot of people out of his property. All right, so here's what it says.
It was the custom of his sons to hold feasts, each on his set day in his own home. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a round of feast days was over, Job would send word to them to sanctify themselves, and rising early in the morning, he would make burnt offerings, one for each of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned and blasphemed God in their thoughts. This is what Job always used to do.
Yeah, so Job is so concerned with his children that not even their behavior, but that they might have in their thoughts sinned. So he offers up sacrifices, which, by the way, also tells us that he's sacrificing not in Jerusalem, right? He's sacrificing to God where he lives, which, again, if he's not a Hebrew, maybe it was less problematic, but he is very concerned with, his kids also being good. And it seems like they're a close family, right? They're hanging out together, doing parties together, eating together, and living a good life.
One day, the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord, and the adversary came along with them. The Lord said to the adversary, "Where have you been?" The adversary answered the Lord, "I have been roaming all over the earth."
Now, before we go any further, we will note that the Bible calls him Hasatan. The reason why this translation chose to write the adversary instead of the Satan is because the King James Bible does not call him the Satan, does it? It just calls him Satan. But the title, if you look at Hebrew, is Hasatan. And Hasatan literally means the adversary. So ha before a word means the. So the adversary is a title. The title going out to the adversary, and I'm only going to say what we've seen so far, folks. I'm not going to say what you've heard or what you've thought about Satan from every movie or television show or the Omen, the Exorcist, whatever you've seen, whatever you've heard about the adversary or Satan, I should say. This is not what is happening here in the story. First of all, he's clearly part of what are called B'nai Elohim, which they translate as the divine beings. Literally means the sons of God. Now we know that the B'nai Elohim are sometimes, as we saw from Psalms, seem to be like angels. So the fact that this angel is very much a part of the court of God seems to be pretty obvious. I'm only going to state what's obvious here. I'm not going to state what might happen, what might be later, what you've seen or what you've heard. Put that all aside and read the story as it exists. Hasatan is one of the divine beings. And God talks to him and asks him where he has been. And he's been all around the earth. That's all he says. Doesn't say I've been doing mischief. I'm not going to tell you what it doesn't say. Look at what it says. He presents himself, by the way, before the Lord, which without question shows a subservient position of Satan. This is not a rival to God. It's not God's adversary. It's not God's adversary. Otherwise, he wouldn't be putting himself before the Lord amongst all the other divine beings. Okay? Satan has been roaming around the earth. That's it. Now what happens?
The Lord said to the adversary, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil." The adversary answered the Lord, "Does Job not have good reason to fear God? Why, it is you who have fenced him around, him and his household and all that he has. You have blessed his efforts so that his possessions spread out in the land. But lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face."
Okay. So, all Satan has pointed out to God thus far is, okay, so God says, first of all, God says to Satan, have you seen Job? Have you seen this guy? He's so good. And so God actually puts Job into the mix in the first place by pointing out to Satan, have you seen this guy, Job?
He just doxed Job.
Yeah, well, unintentionally. He wasn't intentionally doxing him. He was putting him out there to praise him, but it backfires because, again, it's also calling into question. Let's not point out really good people. They're just asking for it. This is all, by the way, the conception that we have in Judaism of the evil eye. The reason that you don't want to be known for being successful or rich or happy or anything else is because you're asking for it. So Job inadvertently just asked for it because God asked for it. So yeah, it is a Jewish tradition not to call attention to your success for lots of reasons, by the way. It also cultivates a sense of humility, but it also Kenahora, no evil eye, right? So this is a little bit what's going on here, right? Because Satan counters with, yeah, but that's because you protect him. Yeah, you give him good stuff, and of course he's praising you, God. He's good because he knows he's part of the bargain. So when you really pay attention to the way this story is set up, What it really, of course, is calling into question is the bargain. You do good things and you get rewarded, right? And so as long as the system works, it's working for Job. And of course, he's good and he loves you, God, and he's only going to say good things about you, God, because you're giving him good things. So of course, it's that cycle. It's the cycle, right? The question of which comes first, by the way, that's another interesting point, which the book doesn't really address from the standpoint of like, what do you have to start doing the good stuff first and then you get the blessings, or you get the blessings and then you start doing the good stuff? And this at least says that if you pull out that relationship, God, you're going to see he's just like everybody else. And so that's essentially, you just got the challenge, right? So, and Job literally, again, according to Hasatan, if you take away Job's stuff, he will blaspheme to your face. He will blaspheme. So that's the challenge we're going to see, right? Is you just set it up. So this is a setup, right? We know that this is a setup. This is a story which it's so obviously a setup. It's not, it's so gloriously and obviously a setup that, there's it's not a secret right from the beginning. It's very obvious. Anybody else want to point out anything else that they've seen already in this story? It seems as though the adversary is not God's adversary, but our adversary.
It's sort of the DA.
Yes. He's going to basically run the show, as we're going to see, as now, but look at human beings. He's our adversary. So he's the accusing angel. And that's how Satan has existed, or had existed up until around this point. Because now we're going to get into this issue of Job and Satan in later Jewish sources, including, by the way, pre-Christian sources. So I'm not going to blame the Christians for turning Satan into the force of evil, because clearly what Satan is going to start doing is getting involved in making bad things happen. So Satan kind of, as we're going to see, so far he's just, hey, look at the bad things people do. Let's see what happens now.
The Lord replied to the adversary, "See, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on him." The adversary departed from the presence of the Lord. One day, as his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing, and the she-asses were grazing alongside them, when Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep and the boys, and burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "A Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house so that it collapsed upon the young people, and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you."
All right. So this is Job losing everything. Literally everything that he has, everything he owns, and all of his family. Everything that is Job's has now been taken away from him. He's been stripped of everything. And again, some people have looked for what goes on in this story to kind of date it, right? Because it uses the word Chaldeans, right? So maybe this tells us this is after we already have come into contact with the Chaldeans, the Kasdim, right? The people of Babylonia, because they make a appearance here. The Sabaeans, who are again in modern day Yemen, are also here. But the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans are mentioned early on, so it's difficult to know from those references that they mean anything. And again, one of the things that's so amazing from this story is, and again, one of the reasons why Maimonides had such a problem with this story is that if this is a way to teach a guy a lesson, there are a whole lot of other innocent people and animals that had to suffer to make this lesson play out. If Satan is able to do all of these things, make all these horrible things happen, that's a lot of people that get caught up in the crossfire, the collateral damage, if you will, to Job's test. It's a lot of people, not just his family, but all the slaves, all the household, all the servants, everybody around that gets caught up into this, and all the animals that get taken away. And yeah, it's not just a family that gets wiped out. There's a whole household full of staff, servants, whatever.
Well, we don't know that the animals suffered any more than they would have.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. They're just under different ownerships, I guess. But we could assume that some of them are going to get killed in the being stolen. They probably wouldn't have cared. But yes, it's not.
It doesn't, unless they were really hungry.
Right.
It wouldn't
They were
make it.
maybe doomed anyways, Rosemary. The point
Yeah.
is, who's going to
I
kill
mean,
them? But yes,
the-
I think the point though is, again, there's a lot of people that suffer here,
yes.
including again the family, which is one of the reasons why Maimonides said this didn't happen. This doesn't happen. God does not let this kind of stuff happen, because if this is only to teach a lesson, it's a whole lot of people that suffer and many that die in order for a lesson to be taught.
So what does Rashi say?
Rashi doesn't. Rashi's not that concerned with the philosophical underpinnings of things. For the most part, Rashi just wants to give an answer. Like, what does this mean? He's not concerned with the bigger picture oftentimes, or at least the philosophy of this. Maimonides did, and Maimonides has a real problem with stuff that doesn't seem to conform to rational and plausible and, if it doesn't seem like it could happen with the natural order of, Aristotelian, systems.
The settled order of nature.
He don't like it, which is why he doesn't like fish swallowing up human beings. And if he can say that something is there as a teaching tool, as a lesson, as a parable, as a fable, as a dream, he will do that. And I only offer it from the standpoint of, for those who are looking for the Bible to be literal stories of people that happened, there's a philosophical issue here, which is that Job doesn't suffer by himself. He's the one we read about. We hear about his perspective, and Lord knows there's people who suffer these kinds of things. I mean, people during the Holocaust suffered these kinds of things. They watched their entire families be murdered, or again,
And they lost all their stuff.
Murdered in front of them. They watched their entire village be destroyed, and in many cases, their families separated and whatever. If they didn't see it, he doesn't see it anyways. But it's possible for these things to happen. That's the thing. So I don't want to say, it's not possible.
Maybe not all on one day.
Yeah. And it's also a question of, what is the purpose of this story? And it is definitely to teach a lesson. So when Maimonides steps back and says, it's the reason it's here, and don't read it literally, again, the rabbis didn't do that. In the Midrash and in the Talmud and throughout rabbinic history, the majority answer was, this is a real guy who lived and this stuff really happened to him. And so when it's set up as a test in the first place, that's where you start to go, but Why would God let all these innocent people also die just to teach a lesson? Now, I do not want to ruin the end of the story for you, and so I won't tell you what happens or remind you what happens at the end. But even if the story has a happy ending, which is a matter of an opinion, these people died and they don't come back. I will tell you that. These people don't there's no, hey, by the way, that didn't really happen. Those stories, those people that just popped up and told you all those things, that's not one of the possible answers here. Not that this is all a hallucination that Job is having, or that this is they're playing a game on Job. No, it really happened, and it really happened that the story says that God told Hasatan, you have the power to do all this, which is why we now will start to get Hasatan doing stuff that's really bad. If Satan can do this kind of stuff, again, the implication from the beginning is he only does it with God's permission. God has to give Hasatan the permission to do these things. Satan doesn't have a carte blanche every day. I'm going to go mess with people and take stuff away from people and kill lots of people. But he does, and he doesn't seem to have any issue with it. So that's why we start to have Hasatan being a really bad person who instigates this stuff and does it without God's permission. Again, if you want to understand demons from the Jewish standpoint, you have a harder time doing it from the literature and from the demonology that exists within the Christian church and within the Christian mythologies that we have been exposed to in the last 200 years or 300 years, since Milton, pretty much. Milton loved this story, and of course, anyone who's looking for signs of Satan in the Bible have to look at this story, because this is where Satan exists in the Bible. And there's no other book of the Bible that mentions Hasatan more than this book. So you have to look at this book. But it's hard to get a full glimpse of how Satan manages things. You have to watch Good Omens if you want to know how the devil or how Hasatan works, maybe a bit better. It's still a little Christological. The Good Omens on
The book is good too.
Yeah, and there's a Christian underpinning to it as well, but it's got a little bit more of the Jewish take on how demons work, which is they work with God's permission. All right, so that being said, in the Christian Bible, Hasatan is Jesus's adversary because he's the adversary to Christ. He is the Antichrist. So that is not what we have in the Hebrew Bible. So this is what Satan's stuff, right? So let's read what Job does after he hears this stuff.
Then Job arose, tore his robe, cut off his hair, and threw himself on the ground and worshipped. He said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Now, Job is not often quoted within Jewish sources, in the sense that Job, you'll not find words, for the most part, that are in our liturgy. There is one little prayer that we love so much that at least halfway comes from the book of Job, and that is, Oseh Shalom Bimrumav, right? God makes peace in the universe, or creates a harmony in the universe. That is that line in the book of Job. But for the most part, we don't find Job in our liturgy. We don't find Job in our passages that we use as part of daily prayer or daily experience. It just doesn't happen. This line does have a place in Jewish thought and Jewish worship. It's oftentimes said at Jewish funerals. I used to say it because everyone said it, and I don't say it anymore. I haven't said it in a long time at a funeral, but it's oftentimes said at funerals, Jewish funerals and Christian funerals as well. But the line, right? The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of God. This is Job's answer, which is anything I had was God's. God gave it to me and now God's taken it away, but I'm not going to not praise God. Now, that's a fine answer for Job. Job is still has the wherewithal to have that answer. That's Job's answer. It's an answer of an upright person who is not going to give up on God. I don't say those words mainly because whether or not I believe that, I'm not going to impose that theology on somebody else, especially when they're standing in front of somebody who died, and somebody who may or may not, in their minds, have died too soon or with a sense of justice or whatever. And they may not be in the frame of mind of saying, blessed be the name of God in front of the person who died. I get it. I definitely feel that every life is a gift from God, but it's a difficult thing to impose on somebody that feeling at that time. Adonai natan, Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. Again, it's fine if you want to say that, and it definitely is appropriate and definitely has been said many, many times when someone has died. But whether or not somebody feels like saying that at that moment is kind of a personal decision. But it is a beautiful line, and it is a powerful and poetic and just a devastatingly, there's a devastating truth to that, right? Which is that I came in with nothing and I go out with nothing. Which is why traditionally a person, when they are buried in Jewish tradition, they're buried with nothing, with a burial shroud over their body, right? Come into this world with nothing and I leave with nothing. And we believe that. I mean, that's why we don't, again, bury people regardless of the clothes that they come in or go out with. We don't bury them with their possessions. Jewish burial practices for thousands of years. One of the ways that we can go into a cemetery and know that there's Jews buried there is if we see nothing in the tomb. And I'm only telling you this because regardless of whether that's the case in the last couple hundred years, because it's become a lot more common within Protestant Christianity for sure. And again, most forms of Christianity we come into contact with in America, where people don't get buried with, if they get buried with something that's with a few tchotchkes from their life that are knickknacks and things that were important to them, a blanket or a deck of cards or whatever it is, a chip, a hat. But not the idea that they had to be buried with their possessions, because clearly the Egyptians believed that, and there were a lot of other people that believed that they had to be buried with their possessions. So the fact that thousands of years ago, when Jewish people were coming into contact with some pretty amazing people, the idea that you didn't have to be buried with those kind of things was an interesting affirmation that was way ahead of its time, or at least where we are today. When you get to this line and say that at least 2,500 years ago, the Jewish people shared this idea with people, which is you can't take it with you. So anything I thought I had in this world, it mattered in this world, but it doesn't matter in the next world. I don't get to take it with me.
Maybe you remember a few years ago, there was an excavation in England. I'm thinking it was Leeds, but I could be wrong, where they found a cemetery and the archaeologists were sure it was a Jewish cemetery, which would have meant they couldn't actually research there. And then the rabbinic authorities said, no, it's not a Jewish cemetery because things have been buried with the people.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in Leeds, I think. Yeah. Look, can we be 100% sure that, Jews weren't buried with something? No, occasionally probably there were people in the Middle Ages who wanted to be buried with some knickknack from their lives too. But for the most part, again, burying somebody with a horde, with a Viking horde, these things that we find all over England for that matter, and some other places, we don't have those. Job was not going out with anything. That's what he said. By the way, it's interesting, this idea of returning back, which is this idea that when we die, we kind of return back to the womb, right? Because he says, naked shall I return there. And that's an interesting idea, that kind of like maybe the burial practice would have been at least at some point to bury people in a kind of fetal position, to, without getting too, graphic, this idea that, again, people were kind of returning back when they died, going back. The bodies returning back to the earth, going back to the atoms, and going back to the separating back into the atoms that it was before it became the collective you. Yeah, but it's interesting of this returning again, maybe the spirit returning back. But this idea that we're going back. Anyways, just I'll share with you something that I just read. I actually finished it on the trip. It's a very easy read. And I'll share it with you just because I enjoyed it immensely. It's an example of a book that I picked up because I had heard about it on a podcast. This is not the copy that I read, but maybe this is the hardcover version. Take a look at, if you're interested in the afterlife, this book. It's called 40 Tales from the Afterlives. The author happens to be Jewish, David Eagleman. He's written a lot about the brain. That's been his known for writing about the brain. And I heard him on a podcast talking about the brain. I can't remember which one. It might have been Freakonomics. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, but the one that he was on, I think it was Freakonomics, or one of the Freakonomics related podcasts. But he wrote this book, and it's a collection of possible versions of the afterlives. And one of the ones that he writes about is the fact that if the universe collapses back on itself, we reach a point where right now we're living a life forward, but that if the universe collapses back on itself, if we go in reverse, then our end of our life will be the next time we live our life in reverse, kind of a Benjamin Button life. We live our life at the end, going back to
T.H. White's Merlin.
Yeah, that's one of his versions of the afterlives. But anyways, they're very powerful stories. They're definitely parables, but they're interesting parables that take into consideration science and the way that we look at life today in the modern world. So anyways, this is probably, again, the most famous line of the book of Job, at least for us as Jews. There's other lines that I think are pretty well known, but I think this one's the most well known. Adonai natan, Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. All right. So that's Job's first reaction. His first reaction is, it's not mine. All God's. All right.
For all that, Job did not sin, nor did he cast reproach on God.
That's the first test, if you will. So that's the first part. And that's where the first chapter ends. Again, originally there were no chapter and verse breaks. That one kind of made sense in the sense that that's a summary of that incident. That's not over. The story isn't over.
One day, the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord. The adversary came along with them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to the adversary, "Where have you been?" The adversary answered the Lord, "I have been roaming all over the earth."
Same story, right? Up until that point, that setup, same story, same word for word. Where have you been? Roaming over the earth, right? The day of presenting themselves before God, all the divine beings come back together. Okay, and here we go.
The Lord said to the adversary, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. He still keeps his integrity. So you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason."
And that is different because now God has said, so you made me.
What you made me do.
Yeah, look what you made me do, Satan. You made me go through this exercise and for no reason, because he's still good. Took away everything from him. He's still not doing anything wrong. He hasn't used me taking away everything from him as an excuse to go out and do bad things now. So you said the setup was because I was doing good for him, and that's why he praised me. Well, now I'm not, and he's still praising me. So you were wrong, Satan. You were wrong. So the pitch here now is again, Satan, you made me do this, which again seems to imply that God, of course, not only didn't want to do it, but now look, he did it, and it was for no reason. Yeah. So now what does Satan say?
The adversary answered the Lord, "Skin for skin, all that a man has he will give up for his life, but lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face." So the Lord said to the adversary, "See, he is in your power, only spare his life."
That's the second challenge. So Satan's response is an interesting one, right? Which is, yeah, well, I only took away stuff from him. As long as he's personally not suffering himself, people are willing to give up everything as long as they get to survive. So maybe Job is sitting back there going, I survived, but everybody else got taken, everything else got taken, but I'm still here. Which of course goes back to that Holocaust dilemma, which is, hey, but I survived. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that that's not the way things work oftentimes. Definitely not for people who survived, right? Right? Because you know, it's not that simple, right? There are people who there are people who 50 years after the Holocaust were still living with survivor's guilt. I mean, Primo Levi, who's arguably one of the most famous authors who emerged out of the Holocaust, a survivor from Italy, and he killed himself 50 years later because he could never get rid of the feeling that he should have survived, right? We've already had one suicide from October 7th. Sherelle Golan committed suicide about a year after she came out of, surviving October 7th, Nova. And some people would say that that's some people would say that it isn't, it's harder to survive, and you know. You know, this story from last week, folks. Some of you might have seen this. Vladislav Bongard, who was top of everything else, not only lost his daughter on October 7th, but she also came from Ukraine too. So yeah, this just happened. So, you know, the setup here is one where, you know, Satan says, but he's still alive. That's why he hasn't blasphemed you. He will. But God says, okay, fine. You can mess with him now physically, just can't kill him. Right? Can't kill him. You can do anything you want to him. Just you can't kill him. The only restriction. So now we have the second mission, Satan's second job here.
The adversary departed from the presence of the Lord and inflicted a severe inflammation on Job, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took a potsherd to scratch himself as he sat in the ashes. His wife said to him, "You still keep your integrity? Blaspheme God and die." But he said to her, "You talk as any shameless woman might talk. Should we accept only good from God and not accept evil?" For all that, Job said nothing sinful. When Job's 3 friends heard about all these calamities that had befallen him, each came from his home: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They all met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could not recognize him, and they broke into loud weeping. Each one tore his robe and threw dust into the air onto his head. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spoke a word to him, for they saw how very great was his suffering.
And so this is the second part, and this is these 13 verses make up the second chapter. Again, I wouldn't have put it as a second chapter, but the way that kind of the Christian scholars broke it up, they wanted there to be a break between the first afflictions and the second afflictions, which are the afflictions that happened to Job's body, which seems to be primarily, again, this horrible skin situation. It's like some type of horrible skin disease that hits him from the entire body. And the first person that tells Job you should just curse God and blaspheme and then just die is his wife. And we don't know Job's wife's name, by the way. Job is another one of those unnamed biblical characters, which also kind of allows for Job to be somewhat of a mythical or, again, parable character out of parable, because the family isn't mentioned here. They're not, their names of these children aren't kept. The wife isn't mentioned by name. People are the friends are mentioned by name, right? Though all those places, well, I should say all those places, but those places, especially, again, the Timnite, from Taman, that's Yemen. These areas are all, possible from that region. And again, all this stuff now happens to Job's body, and he still doesn't blaspheme. But it is a real problem. And when his friends come and see him, it says specifically that they don't even, they almost don't recognize him, right? Because of how pathetic he's looking now, right? How bad it is. And they don't say anything to him for the first week, right? They don't talk to him, which is interesting because, again, we have a tradition in Judaism that you don't have to say something to somebody who's been suffering, right? Our instinct is to say something to somebody, especially after they've suffered a loss. And Jewish tradition oftentimes instructs us not to talk, to actually just sit there and just be there for the person and not say anything. That we don't have to fill the silence with words. So it's hard and it's difficult for people not to sometimes want to say something, but sometimes just being there for somebody is really all we can do. And his friends seem to do that, at least for the first week. They seem to just be there for him. And again, we don't know that they're Hebrew. None of these, I mean, all of these names could possibly be Jewish, but they're not necessarily. Eliphaz is the only name here that actually has, so far that we've encountered, that has God's name in it, Eli, right? But when they see him and they're upset by his appearance, they tear their robe and throw dust onto their head as if, again, they're in mourning. Okay. So interestingly, they come to him now after he's suffering. It doesn't say that they came to him when his family was wiped out. They come to him now. And now they're actually with him as if he's dead. Right? The things that they've just enacted, tearing their clothes, throwing dust on their head, is what happens when somebody dies. So this is what they're doing. Okay? This is the end of the introduction. This is the end of the prologue. So what we're going to get into now is Job's monologues and the friends' dialogues. And we're going to get into this now. So this is all we have from the setup. That's all we have. You'll see why some people feel that this is not a real story, because there's so little there that people are like, come on, this has got to be a setup. This can't be real. So, you decide whether, as we read this story, this is meant to be a parable or not, but you can see why people felt it was. Because for them, this doesn't seem like this could possibly be real. So let's dive into this. So we're going to read a chapter or so of Job's speeches. And this is the bulk of the book. Most of the book are these dialogues.
Afterward, Job began to speak and cursed the day of his birth. Job spoke up and said, "Perish the day on which I was born, and the night it was announced, a male has been conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above have no concern for it. May light not shine on it. May darkness and deep gloom reclaim it. May a pall lie over it. May what blackens the day terrify it. May obscurity carry off that night. May it not be counted among the days of the year. May it not appear in any of its months. May that night be desolate. May no sound of joy be heard in it. May those who cast spells upon the day damn it. Those who prepare to disable Leviathan, may its twilight stars remain dark. May it hope for light and have none. May it not see the glimmerings of the dawn, because it did not block my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes."
So the first part of this is Job cursing the day of his birth. And of course, he does it in a very poetic and very profound way, and goes on and on about the day should never have happened. The day never should have happened. Why was I born? And he does it in a very descriptive way, right? Why was this day, why did this day even exist the day that, right? Now,
Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me or breasts for me to suck? For now I would be lying in repose, asleep and at rest, with the world's kings and counselors who rebuild ruins for themselves, or with nobles who possess gold and who fill their houses with silver. Or why was I not buried like a buried stillbirth, like babies who never saw the light? There the wicked cease from troubling, there rest those whose strength is spent. Prisoners are wholly at ease, they do not hear the taskmaster's voice. Small and great alike are there, and the slave is free of his master. Why does he give light to the sufferer and life to the bitter in spirit, to those who wait for death, but it does not come, who search for it more than for treasure, who rejoice to exultation and are glad to reach the grave? To the man who has lost his way, whom God has hedged about, my groaning serves as my bread, my roaring pours forth as water. For what I feared has overtaken me, what I dreaded has come upon me. I had no repose, no quiet, no rest, and trouble came.
so that is the first part of Job's um, response, finally. He curses the day he was born, and he curses the fact that he was born. You know, if I had just not been born, if I had been stillborn, if I had not come into the world, I wouldn't have suffered. So again, if my whole life hadn't unfolded, that would have been a whole lot better. Better for me not to have been born. Notice, by the way, he has not condemned God. He has only said it was better for me not to have been here. And that's fair, I would say, reaction to suffering. Right? It would be better for me not to have been here, not to have had to go through this. If I'd never been born, never would have had to go through all this stuff. This is kind of it's a wonderful life question, right? If I hadn't been here and had to go through all this suffering to begin with by just not being here, not part of the equation, I'm not here, right? So that's what he says. But it's better for me not to have been here. And of course, he says, this is what I always feared, right? Even in his success, it tells us one really interesting piece here that I think people kind of gets obscured, which is that Job was never 100% sure that he was going to be rewarded always, right? He was afraid. He says, I was afraid that this would happen. So it shows you that also, even if somebody is good, blameless, doesn't mean that they feel like they're going to live without problems.
Couldn't you say that's sort of part of living blameless, is that you remain humble with what you've got, and you're like, I still can't believe I got this.
I would say yes. And I would say that that's sometimes forgotten in this discussion of Job's response is, I always was afraid that this could happen. Now, again, this lends itself to the rabbinic midrash of, yeah, but Job wasn't always good. By the way, it never said Job was always good. I just want to say, the reason that you can have midrash that Job was part of Pharaoh's courtiers, by the way, the Pharaoh's courtiers, just to understand where the midrash, because I told you before, one of the underpinnings of midrash is that the midrash doesn't like people without a back, like there is a backstory for people. We just got to make the connection. Sometimes their name isn't the same, right? Their names get changed because people had different names, right? So people's names get changed in the Bible. So you can have a changed name. It doesn't mean that like the person's name in one place doesn't mean that they're always known by that, right? So Esther's name was changed. It was Hadassah. So you can have a different name. So if Job is one of the courtiers, the midrash is that one of the courtiers is Yitro, is Jethro, who is who is the first to defect. He's the first to tell Pharaoh, "Hey, this God is for real. I'm out of here," and he becomes Moses' father-in-law. The other one here is Job, who eventually gets onto the right path, but needs a little bit more proof in order for him to get it. The last one is this guy named Jambres, which is one of the, he's bad, and he's a bad dude who might eventually become another really smart person, Bilam. And so there's different midrash about these guys in the Apocrypha as well, which is that the three courtiers, and again, you don't have to have three courtiers, but sets it up well, like the three wise men in the Christian midrash. Having these people have a backstory is that, yeah, they were there in the court, and there was one who got it right away. There was one who kind of got it, which is Job. And then there's one who got it, but it was way too late by the time he got it, and that's Bilam. But the rabbis like the fact that these guys have powers or are really successful or, just really smart people. But yeah. Anyways, the point is that he may never have been that bad or may not have had a backstory other than, again, as Judith said, he's a God-fearer. He's a person who fears God. Part of fearing God is that, hey, I don't know that I'm doing 100% of what I'm supposed to be doing, and I don't know that it still can't go. So that's Job's response. Is Job's response thus far? No one can really say there's anything it's really not a, it's not there's nothing he does wrong here so far. Well, let's watch now as we get into his friends. So we're going to read one, maybe two of his friends' dialogues with him. Here we go. Here's the first.
Then Eliphaz the Temanite said in reply, "If one ventures a word with you, will it be too much? But who can hold back his words?"
Now, it's interesting to show, and let's point out real quick, just once, because it's only going to be neat to say once. His friends don't say anything until he started talking. So once Job starts talking, that invites them to talk. So in all fairness, the friends, I'm not going to say anything about the friends. You read what the friends say. But the friends do follow a traditional model of not talking until Job started talking. They let him speak first. This is his reply. The word in Hebrew, vaya'an, means he says it after he spoke. And this is his reply. Eliphaz goes first.
"See, you have encouraged many. You have strengthened failing hands. Your words have kept him who stumbled from falling. You have braced knees that gave way. But now that it overtakes you, it is too much. It reaches you, and you are unnerved. Is not your piety your confidence, your integrity your hope? Think now, what innocent man ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? As I have seen, those who plow evil and sow mischief reap them. They perish by a blast from God, are gone at the breath of his nostrils. The lion may roar, the cub may howl, but the teeth of the king of beasts are broken. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and its whelps are scattered. A word came to me in stealth. My ear caught a whisper of it. In thought-filled visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, fear and trembling came upon me, causing all my bones to quake with fright. A wind passed by me, making the hair of my flesh bristle. It halted. Its appearance was strange to me. A form loomed before my eyes. I heard a murmur, a voice. Can mortals be acquitted by God? Can a man be cleared by his maker? If he cannot trust his own servants and casts reproach on his angels, how much less those who dwell in houses of clay, whose origin is dust, who are crushed like the moth, shattered between daybreak and evening, perishing forever unnoticed. Their cord is pulled up and they die, and not with wisdom.
We're going to keep going because that's not really over.
Call now. Will anyone answer you? To whom among the holy beings will you turn? Vexation kills the fool, passion slays the simpleton. I myself saw a fool who had struck roots. Impulsively, I cursed his home. May his children be far from success. May they be oppressed in the gate with none to deliver them. May the hungry devour his harvest, carrying it off in baskets. May the thirsty swallow their wealth. Evil does not grow out of the soil, nor does mischief spring from the ground. For man is born to do mischief, just as sparks fly upward. But I would resort to God. I would lay my case before God, who performs great deeds which cannot be fathomed, wondrous things without number, who gives rain to the earth and sends water over the fields, who raises the lowly up high so that the dejected are secure in victory, who thwarts the designs of the crafty so that their hands cannot gain success, who traps the clever in their own wiles. The plans of the crafty go awry. By day they encounter darkness, at noon they grope as in the night. But he saves the needy from the sword of their mouth, from the clutches of the strong. So there is hope for the wretched. The mouth of wrongdoing is stopped. See how happy is the man whom God reproves. Do not reject the discipline of the Almighty. He injures, but he binds up. He wounds, but his hands heal. He will deliver you from 6 troubles. In 7, no harm will reach you. In famine, he will redeem you from death. In war, from the sword. You will be sheltered from the scourging tongue. You will have no fear when violence comes. You will laugh at violence and starvation and have no fear of wild beasts. For you will have a pact with the rocks in the field, and the beasts of the field will be your allies. You will know that all is well in your tent. When you visit your wife, you will never fail. You will see that your offspring are many, your descendants like the grass of the earth. You will come to the grave in ripe old age as shocks of grain are taken away in their season. See, we have inquired into this, and it is so. Hear it and accept it.
There is Eliphaz's discussion with him, or dialogue, his answer back, his response, which is God always does what's right. God pays back people what they deserve, which means you've done something bad. Now, we already know he hasn't done anything bad. He hasn't done anything to deserve this, at least not from the story. From within the story, we are told that he does not deserve this. And yet Eliphaz has just told him in a beautiful way all the things that God does, and God will forgive you because God does that. So Eliphaz, and again, those couple of chapters are beautiful. Very similar to what we read in Psalms. Very similar ideas when we read about how God protects and saves us. Could be from one of the Psalms that we've read that, again, are Psalms of praise of God's salvation. Interestingly, we never read those chapters. Beautiful. but they're all set up. They're all wrong. Everything that the guy just said, we almost can't quote. We can't. Because if somebody said, well, where did you get that beautiful line? Where did you get that beautiful line that God, you will be sheltered from the scourging tongue. You will have no.
That is so ironic.
I can't use it because Eliphaz said it. I can't use any of this. It's dead. It's amazing. And the Bible just played a game on us. They just played a game. I think intentionally, again, in not a humorous way, but an ironic way, which is you can say the most beautiful things about God, and you can say these kinds of things, and if they're wrong, they're wrong. And yeah, I don't want to say too much more because we have to read to read the full context of this. But yeah, I think, yeah, we have time for Job's response to Eliphaz. So Eliphaz gave a very traditional response, which is a completely acceptable response from the standpoint of Jewish tradition. It's completely, it's a beautiful response. It's beautiful lines, very similar to the stuff that we've read in Psalms and Proverbs for that matter. I mean, especially things like, you can go to your wife and never fail, right? That's a much more Proverbs kind of line. But and also he will deliver you from 6 troubles, 7. That's exactly the kind of phrases we read towards the end of the book of Proverbs. So that same style, the number style. So yeah, you never see those things quoted. You'll never see these lines quoted. You can't quote it. Who did you just quote? I quoted Eliphaz, who's an idiot. Well, let's see. I don't want to ruin it, but I already kind of told you that we don't quote it. So here's what we've got. Here's Job's response to, and this is where we'll finish today. Job's response to his first friend. So he spoke. Eliphaz has now given his feeling, his response, and now Job's response. That's what we got to read today. This is the structure for this book.
Then Job said in reply, if my anguish were weighed, my full calamity laid on the scales, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. That is why I spoke recklessly. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit absorbs their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me. Does a wild ass bray when he has grass? Does a bull bellow over his fodder? Can what is tasteless be eaten without salt? Does mallow juice have any flavor? I refuse to touch them. They're like food when I'm sick. Would that my request were granted, that God gave me what I wished for. Would that God consented to crush me, loosed his hand and cut me off. Then this would be my consolation as I writhed in unsparing pains, that I did not suppress my words against the Holy One. What strength have I that I should endure? How long have I to live that I should be patient? Is my strength the strength of rock? Is my flesh bronze? Truly, I cannot help myself. I have been deprived of resourcefulness. A friend owes loyalty to one who fails, though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My comrades are fickle, like a wadi, like a bed on which streams once ran. They are dark with ice. Snow obscures them. But when they thaw, they vanish. In the heat, they disappear where they are. Their course twists and turns. They run into the desert and perish. Caravans from Tema look to them. Processions from Sheba count on them. They are disappointed in their hopes. When they reach the place, they stand aghast. So you are as nothing. At the sight of misfortune, you take fright. Did I say to you, I need your gift? Pay a bribe for me out of your wealth? Deliver me from the clutches of my enemy? Redeem me from violent men? Teach me. I shall be silent. Tell me where I am wrong. How trenchant honest words are. But what sort of reproof comes from you? Do you devise words of reproof, but count a hopeless man's words as wind? You would even cast lots over an orphan or barter away your friend. Now, be so good as to face me. I will not lie to your face. Relent. Let there not be injustice. Relent. I am still in the right. Is injustice on my tongue? Can my palate not discern evil?
Yeah, we're not done yet, so keep going.
Truly, man has a term of service on earth. His days are like those of a hireling. like a slave who longs for evening's shadows, like a hireling who waits for his wage. So I have been allotted months of futility, nights of misery have been apportioned to me. When I lie down, I think, when shall I rise? Night drags on, and I'm sated with tossings until morning twilight. My flesh is covered with maggots and clods of earth. My skin is broken and festering. My days fly faster than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. Consider that my life is but wind. I shall never see happiness again. The eye that gazes on me will not see me. Your eye will seek me, but I shall be gone, as a cloud fades away. So whoever goes down to Sheol does not come up. He returns no more to his home. His place does not know him. On my part, I will not speak with restraint. I will give voice to the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea or the dragon that you set a watch over me? When I think my bed will comfort me, my couch will share my sorrow. You frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, till I prefer strangulation, death to my wasted frame. I am sick of it. I shall not live forever. Let me be, for my days are a breath. What is man that you make much of him, that you fix your attention upon him? You inspect him every morning, examine him every minute. Will you not look away from me for a while? Let me be till I swallow my spittle. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, watcher of men? Why make me your target and a burden to myself? Why do you not pardon my transgression and forgive my iniquity? For soon I shall lie down in the dust. When you seek me, I shall be gone.
So those two chapters are Job's responses to Eliphaz, which are very powerful. And again, one can make the argument, those at least you should be able to, should be able to quote because they are true, right? When we think about the lines that we just read, specifically, what we take away from these lines, what are the lines that we can quote, or what are the lines that stay with us, if you will. Again, a lot of these are kinds of words that, that we would have, that we have, kind of seen versions of. For example, the line that, sticks out in my mind is, and again, why, what is man that you that you make much of him, that you fix your attention upon him, right? You inspect him every morning, examine him every minute, which is very similar to the line that we read in Psalms, right? Ma enosh, what is man that you make much of him, that you fix your attention on him, right? Sounds familiar, right? It's almost exactly the same line. Exactly the same, right? Almost the same, right? Right. So this one, oh wait, I didn't share it. Sorry. Yeah, hold it 1 second. I didn't share this one. Put it up on my screen. Oh wait, did I? No. Yeah, this is the line from Psalms. This is the line from Job. Right? So he's literally almost reframing, he's taking almost verbatim the lines from Psalms, and is essentially saying, God, why are you doing this? Look at somebody else for a change. So, I'd rather you not watch me, God, because it's nothing but bad stuff. So Job is saying, look, I know what my fate is, and I know this is what I'm experiencing. But he's not willing to, as much as he's willing to take response. I mean, he's obviously suffering. He's not denying that he's suffering, but what he's denying is that he deserves the suffering. That's what he refuses to accept. He refuses to accept the fact that this is a just punishment. That's where he's saying, this isn't right from the standpoint of, I deserve this, or I've done something to deserve it. And so when his friends come and say to him, you know, you've done something wrong, he's saying, but I haven't. This is not happening for a reason that not any of the reasons that you're saying. And so that's what he has an issue with. He has an issue with what his friends are saying. And again, none of it leaves the realm of traditional response up until now. Again, I'm showing you this because he just almost verbatim quoted Psalms. And he's not saying that it's not true. He's just saying, at least for me, this is not, I'm not being punished for a reason. And so you can't quote this kind of, if you quote this kind of stuff to me, I'm just going to tell you, okay, so that isn't what's happened in this case. It's not what's happening here. I hope everyone sees that. So, again, Job wants to essentially to be done with this world. He knows it's not a good answer. You know, just being dead is not still going to answer the question, but he says, I'd rather not be here. Again, some of the references that he makes, people have pointed out. He talks about Sheol, which is the afterlife, right? He's again saying we don't come back out of the afterlife. We don't leave that world. He also talks about the sea and the dragon, which again seem to be references to primordial mythology, which again, if you look at this, it says, if we go back to the note on 3:8, which I'll show you just quickly what that reference was. It was a reference to, I think, Rosemary, you'll know what it's a reference to. Have you read it?
Leviathan.
Uh-huh. As you were reading it. Right. So that's another reference to the mythological sea creatures. The sea dragon, or the Yam and Leviathan. Is it all the same, or are they different primordial sea creatures that are invoked in this? We'll see some other references to these kind of mythological entities, beasts, or mythological animals. Of a reference to the phoenix, actually, in this book. So there are references to popular mythology. No real answers to it, by the way. They're invoked and they're mentioned without a lot of explanation. But it shows, again, a kind of a grounding in the Near Eastern mythology of the time. And it's used in ways that are just so, obviously they're so perfunctory that, that there isn't a necessity to explain it because people just knew what they were talking about. We have a harder time understanding it because it's not part of our mythology. It's not part of our common language. But, when people threw out things like this, everyone knew what they were talking about. Just as if you say Woodstock today, everyone knows what period of time you're talking about. They understand the backstory of what you say when you say Woodstock. If you say the words, Auschwitz, they know what you're talking about. These are words and places and things that we can say, and everybody knows what it is you're talking about. So, these are references that we'll see in the course of Job. So we will be together next week again. We'll be reading, hopefully, again, Rosemary, thank you for taking us through these first chapters.
Thank you.
First dialogue, if you will, between Job and Eliphaz. And next week, when we start up, we're going to be reading from the next friend, Bildad. So again, if you want to do any reading or any back, kind of comparison shopping, you can go watch A Serious Man in the coming days, rewatch that Coen Brothers movie, which was not considered one of their classics, but is definitely their most Jewish film. And it is I think, a very philosophical exploration of Jewish responses. It's very interesting what they did with the three friends in that story, because they have three rabbis in that movie. Yeah, to me, it's a very interesting film. But yeah, so next week we'll be reading about we'll read the next two responses, Bildad, and we'll read Zophar, the last two, the next two friends. We'll do the last two friends, because there's one other guy that's going to make an appearance, which we probably won't read next week, and that is a fourth guy named Elihu, who makes an appearance as one of the talkers. So again, thank you, Rosemary. It's great to have everybody back into study, and we'll be together tomorrow night reading the Talmud and reading about Rabbi Meir, one of the interesting rabbis of our texts, who does some amazing things. So again, we'll see you next week. Take care, everybody. Be well.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Be happy. It's Adar. Be happy.